So let's ease into talking about RSS feeds by making a simple blog post. So here I am at my blog. I'm logged into my administrative account, as I can see by this black menu at the top of the page. I'm going to go to my dashboard and make a new post, which is pretty simple. I'm just going to put in a title and then some text. Before I click publish, I want to make sure that I categorize my post. I'll call this one household tips. And then I can preview it, but I'm just going to click publish. Now I can view my post. Et voila, we have a new blog post. What isn't obvious is that WordPress has some built-in RSS feeds that are automatically updated whenever you make a new blog post. By default, your RSS feed will contain 10 of your most recent blog posts. This is a number that can be changed in your WordPress settings under reading. So here we are back at my blog, and we've made a post, and here it is at twopeopleandacat.com. What's really cool about this is in the background, WordPress is generating an RSS feed. Now, to give you an idea of what that is, let's just look at one. You'll commonly see on blogs and on podcast sites, you'll see a link that says RSS. So under RSS feeds here on my website at Two People and a Cat, I'm going to click on Get All Blog Posts. And what I have here is a list of the most recent blog posts. And keep in mind, I do mean blog posts. This does not include static pages. I happen to be using Firefox for my browser. So that means my posts are laid out in a way that I can read, like a human being can understand this. But if you're using a different browser, you might actually see the XML code. And don't let that confuse you. This code is the code that is generating the feed. It's like HTML code makes web pages. Well, this XML code makes RSS feeds, and its primary purpose is to transfer data. What we're really interested in here is this RSS URL. And in WordPress, it's my website/feed. And WordPress is doing that automatically. I didn't have to do anything to make that happen. So a person could grab your RSS feed, put it into any RSS reader, and subscribe to your blog. So with just a couple of clicks, I have subscribed to Two People and a Cat. So what that means is I would not need to go to various blogs to check for new posts, but my RSS reader would deliver my subscriptions to me. We could have also used Firefox. Here I am at the blog. I see an RSS link and I click on it. Firefox recognizes it's an RSS link, so it displays it nicely and it gives me a chance to subscribe. And by doing this, it's putting a little bookmark up here in my toolbar. So this is one way that people will use an RSS feed. They'll copy that feed address and paste it into some type of an RSS reader so that they can follow your blog. So you might ask, what do RSS feeds have to do with podcasts? RSS feeds deliver your podcast. There is no podcast without them. Now, before we get into the nitty-gritty of a podcast RSS feed, let's take a look at some more of these built-in RSS feeds that come automatically with WordPress. So WordPress will create a unique RSS feed for every blog category that you define. What does that mean? Let's say I have a website, mysite.com, and I create a blog category called recipes. WordPress automatically will create a feed for that category. So a person could take that feed and subscribe to just posts regarding recipes. Now let's take a closer look at this URL. We see category/recipes/feed. The only thing I did was make a blog category called recipes, and WordPress did the rest. So for any category that you create, WordPress will create a unique RSS feed, and it will use this syntax. So I'd like to see how these RSS feeds work on a podcast website. So here we are at my website, questionpodcast.com. This is my site for my podcast, and it is on a WordPress site. Based on what we saw before, I should be able to add /feed to my website address and see what I call the whole site feed. And we can see by looking at this feed, I'm again using Firefox, we can see that some of these posts do have media files attached to them. And that is essentially what a podcast episode is, right? It's a blog post that has a media file attached to it that is delivered via an RSS feed. So let me point this out. Here we have an essay. I do not consume podcasts. I listen to them, if you wanted to know. In any case, that's an essay. It is not a podcast episode. So if a person were to use my whole site RSS feed to subscribe to my blog, they would get both my podcast episodes as well as any of these extraneous essays that I might include in that same feed. You'll recall from earlier that a person can use any RSS feed and pop it into an RSS reader to subscribe to a blog or a podcast. That's fine, but where the problem comes in is if you want to submit that feed to a podcast directory. iTunes, Google Play, Stitcher. These are common places where people find and subscribe to podcasts, so it's a good idea to be in these directories if you want to increase your chances of being discovered. In order for your podcast feed to work properly in these directories, the first thing you're going to need is a dedicated RSS feed, meaning a feed that doesn't have anything but podcast episodes in it, which would, of course, include some type of a media file. So how do we make a dedicated podcast feed? We saw on Two People and a Cat that WordPress creates a unique RSS feed for every category that we create. So this gives me an idea. Couldn't we create a category to generate a dedicated podcast feed? That is to say, to create a feed that only includes podcast episodes. So the answer is yes. I've created a feed with a blog category that only includes podcast episodes. So in addition to having a dedicated feed, something we easily created with a WordPress blog category, we also need to transmit certain information in that feed in order for it to be accepted by these popular podcast directories. And to give you an idea of what I'm talking about, let's just go ahead and look at a feed. So here we are looking at the RSS feed to my podcast, Question of the Day. And I should point out that you could go anywhere on the internet, grab an RSS feed, and just take a close look at it, and you're going to see something similar to what I'm showing you here. Now, for the ease of kind of noticing things, I've highlighted some areas. These highlighted areas are specific to the podcast directories. So when you submit a feed to iTunes, for example, it's going to need to know the name of your show. It's going to need to, have a summary, your name, a link to your cover art. All that stuff needs to be included in your RSS feed. Now, while WordPress, as we saw, does a beautiful job of making stable RSS feeds, it does not include this information that's specific to your podcast. The good news is that you can install PowerPress, and that plugin, PowerPress, will, number one, create a dedicated feed for your podcast, as well as insert all of this necessary information needed in order to be accepted to the podcast directories. So let's go ahead and take a look at that feed that PowerPress made for my podcast. I'm at my website, questionpodcast.com, and I'm going into my WordPress dashboard. And on the left-hand side in this menu, I will see something that says PowerPress. That's because I installed it. It's very easy to install. If I click on feeds, look at this, special podcast only feed. That's exactly what we needed. We need a dedicated feed and a feed that contains all the information that makes it a good feed for those various directories. And that is what PowerPress does. It makes that feed for you. Now, it's important to know what your feed is, because when you submit your podcast to the various directories, that's the feed you're going to give it. And I can use that feed to subscribe to my own podcast using various applications, see what things look like. I could also troubleshoot. So if I post my episode and it doesn't show up in Apple Podcasts, sometimes you wonder, did I do something wrong, or are they just being slow on their end? What's going on? Well, you can always look at your own feed. So I could copy this feed and pop it into Firefox, and I see that it shows up. I see that that latest episode is there, and it includes my media file is attached. So I know that my feed is fine. There's nothing wrong with it. And I don't need to worry. Apple Podcasts will eventually come around and update their directory. So it's just really important. If you're a podcaster, you have to know what your feed is. You have to know it.